Well, hello everybody. My name is Evan and I like to write. And this is the channel Evan Writes, obviously. I mean, do I have to say more? Today I have something new planned. I'm going to go ahead and review a book. A book that I tried so hard to like because I bought it, but I just could not finish it for the life of me. I tried to power through it as much as I could, but there were just too many glaring issues with this novel that just eventually made me give it up about 3/4 of the way through. And believe me, wouldn't do that if I just didn't feel like it was such a chore to have to read. Anyway, we're going to get on to business. So to start this off, I'm going to talk about the good things about this book. Now, this book has a really cool start. I really love how the book began. It started off with the main character, Kieran, talking to his jailer, a demon, that's what he says, named Talon. Now, Talon and Kieran end up coming to a consensus that they will tell his story through the use of a magical stone that records their voice. So throughout the book, you're going to hear his story and her story, but they're both talking about Kieran himself. So she's talking about him and he's talking about himself. Every chapter will end up switching between the two perspectives. One being told from a later point in Kieran's life, where he felt was the turning point in his life, to where he got to today, how he ended up in that jail cell. And the jailer, Talon, tells his story from an earlier point in his life where she feels like that's where he really started screwing up to the point where he would end up in that jail cell. So it was kind of a cool premise. I thought it would be a really exciting story to read that way, and I just jumped right into it and I read as much as I could. Now, the first few chapters and everything were really interesting. There were a lot of cool things that are introduced. I love the deities in this book. I love the religions. It's really cool how she fleshed them out. My favorite chapter of all in this book is a vision or dream sequence where the main character, Kieran, ends up meeting and speaking with one of these deities. And it is just handled in such a cool mystical way where you actually do get some cool answers, but in such a riddled type of language that you wonder what about it fits and how it fits where. And it just gives you so many cool things to draw on as you read through the book and try to connect all these different things that are happening and what's supposed to happen in the book. And I feel like she did that really well. It made me really excited, and every single time they talked about these gods and goddesses, I felt like I wanted to know more. I felt like that was the coolest part of this story and the part she fleshed out the most. The next thing that I kind of liked was the idea of this item called a guiche. I don't know if I said that correctly. That's just how I read it, is the guiche. It is an item that belonged to somebody that was later used to transport part of their soul, almost like a Voldemort Horcrux. So a magician would pull the soul from somebody and store part of it in this item, and whoever held that item or wielded that item could theoretically give that person orders, and if they don't comply with those orders, they could die. Now, that was something really cool, introduced in the very first chapter, so that's not a spoiler, okay? That was introduced in the very first chapter, told by Kieran, where he found out he is now enslaved and the guiche is part of it. So you find out that whoever is going to purchase him as a slave theoretically is going to have absolute control over him. And that sounded so interesting to me. Like, how are you going to rebel when you can't? When you literally cannot disobey orders or you will die. And that really got me excited to read this book. That's the reason I picked it up, is because I wanted to see how that played out. Without going into spoilers too much, you can go ahead and close off your ears if you don't want to hear a minor spoiler right now. Just skip forward about 30 seconds and it'll be done. But starting now, the guiche, though it was a really cool thing and that she spent a lot of time explaining what it was and what it could do, ended up being pointless, at least through 3/4 of the way through the book, because the people who purchased him pretty quickly returned it to him so nobody could control him. And it felt like just a wasted story element that would have been so cool and so different from other fantasy stories. That was the reason I read this book, that that she just got rid of it too fast. Now I wonder if it's going to come back later on, like in the series or maybe in the last quarter of this book that I never got to. But right now it feels like wasted narrative, where she set up something really cool and then just decided not to do it anymore. Or maybe it was too hard for her to write, or it's set up for another book. I don't know. But that was something really cool that I was liking a lot that was just thrown out. Now, before I move on to the bad things, I'm going to move on to the ugly things. Now, ugly, I'm not talking about ugly in terms of just, yeah, this is more bad stuff. These are things that people either think are really cool or really bad. There's really no middle section here from all the reviews that I've read in my personal experience. You either like these next aspects or you hate them. All right, so now getting into the ugly parts of The Ruin of Kings. Now, the two things I'm going to talk about are actually things that I personally enjoyed about this book, some of the things that drew me to it, but they are things that, as I've read in other reviews, pulled people out of the narrative and got too confusing for them and eventually made them not want to read the book anymore. The first of which I already mentioned would be the swapping perspectives between Kieran and Talon telling Kieran's story. Because Kieran's story occurs later and Talon's story occurs earlier in his life, characters got mixed up, names got mixed up, and people just had a hard time following who was who and where they were and what was going on. And I can understand that. I feel like I follow the story pretty well, reading both sides, and I feel like some characters were introduced in the past at a good time right before they were mentioned in any sort of necessary capacity in the future, or rather the current time period according to Kieran, which are both past timelines, I guess. But a lot of people did not like the switching perspectives. They felt like a linear story would have been better. Now, maybe they would have liked switching perspectives still, but if the story itself was linear instead of jumping from present to past to present to past to present to past, and I can see that. I personally enjoyed the jumping back and forth until it became gimmicky, which I will explain a little bit more when I get to the bad. But as an idea in and of itself, I thought it was really cool. I enjoyed reading it that way, and it helped me to understand the character a little bit more. And I think if it was just done a little bit better, it could have made the book really great. The next thing that a lot of people either liked or didn't like were that the author included footnotes as part of her world building. I've heard of this in other books, listening to author tubers and booktubers talk about them, and it seems like overall people have mixed opinions of footnotes in general. They feel it pulls them out of the story, it breaks the immersion. With this is the first novel I've read that included footnotes, and I kind of liked it. It was kind of cool getting to know little extra tidbits of the world through those footnotes. But the bad part was that later on, those footnotes became like the only true source of progression to me. I will get more to that a little bit later. But if you're not a big fan of footnotes, normally I would say just get over it and skip the footnotes, but they are there. They're kind of glaring at you, and there's really almost no way to just skip them, without just like forcing yourself through, and then it's still breaking immersion a little bit. So I understand that. And I understand that footnotes aren't for most people. Some people in their reviews talked about how footnotes made them feel like they were reading a scientific paper or a paper for school instead of a novel, and I totally understand that. I can see why people would complain about that. And if you're not a fan of footnotes, this might not be the book for you. I personally was fine with it. Anyway, those are the two big things that I came across in other reviews that seemed to be, the ugly issues of this book, things that people either liked or they hated. Now I'm going to go ahead and talk about the bad. I saved the bad for last because I felt like if I started with the bad, it would have made my review a little too opinionated towards my side, because, as I said before, I did not completely finish this book. I had to eventually put it down because I just couldn't make myself finish it. Now I'm going to explain why. My first issue with this book is that the main character, Kieran, seems to be a collection of every fantasy trope ever. He is a thief who we only ever see thieving one time, who's supposed to be good at it, but we never really see him be good at it. He's a bard or a minstrel who's not good at being a bard or a minstrel, but halfway through the book decides he wants to be one again, or something like that. It was kind of confusing at the time. He's an orphan who really has like 40 different bloodlines of prestige or something, and he was actually raised by people, so he technically wasn't an orphan. It's just really weird and like confusing. Like they didn't know what they wanted him to be. Like any fantasy trope you can think of, you can add to him, and he will be that character for you. He starts off being like a voicey character, a snarky character, having an interesting, I guess, an interesting personality. But as you got later in the book, his personality, along with the personalities of other characters, would sort of fall flat. They would end up doing and saying things completely out of character with no motivation to do so whatsoever. And it just broke the immersion so many times to me when characters would act out of their established character. And I'm not going to give any specific reviews in case, or any specific examples in case you guys want to go through and read this book. I don't want to spoil anything for you because some of those sections are a little spoilery when they do act super out of character. But that was an issue I had, that the main character had every trope going for him, but that he wasn't innately interesting, and all the other characters started off as interesting, but then when they broke their own character, doing things against established character traits, they fell flat too. The largest issue I had with this book, though, and the reason I eventually stopped reading it, was the overall lack of progression I felt reading the book. Reading through Talon's storyline, where she talked about Kieran's past, like his far past, felt like that progressed a lot more than the current timeline. The current timeline, you have zero idea what Kieran's motivations are, what he wants from life, what he's supposed to be doing, what other people want him for, why they bought him, why they're hiding him, whatever. You have zero idea why you should even care about this main character named Kieran. You have no idea whatsoever. And anytime you get close to finding something out about it and learning more about this character, or why other people have reasons to stay with him, here comes a gimmick to end the chapter and push that conversation way off to the future. And when that conversation comes up in the future, it's pushed back again by another gimmick. Go ahead and, for the next 30 seconds, I'm going to go ahead and give an example of what one of these gimmicks are. So just go ahead, close off your ears if you don't want spoilers. Starting now. Now that those of people have closed their ears who don't want to hear the spoilers, at the end of a conversation Kieran has with some of the other characters to find out if, what this prophecy concerning him is about, because the book relies that these people came after him and are trying to protect him due to a prophecy about him. Every time you're about to figure out what that prophecy is, or even a portion of it, like even a sentence of it, to even know a little bit about what this character is supposed to grow into, nothing happens. Like a gimmick comes, a dragon comes and breaks into the conversation, and you don't get any answers. And later on, something else happens. A boat comes right as that conversation gets to that same point, and you don't get any answers. Or countless other gimmicks to prevent you from getting any answers as to knowing why you should care about this character and what his motivations are at this point in his life, and why you even need to care, why this part of the story matters. You don't get any of that. And it's terrible because this character feels really passive. Like he doesn't act for himself. Like he can't act for himself because not even he knows what the heck he's supposed to be doing. And it's terrible. You don't get any of that information. And I tried to push through the book until it would eventually give me something. And after reading 300 of pages in the middle of the book, I eventually gave up because I didn't even get a tiny morsel of what that prophecy was, what the character's motivations were. I didn't get any of those answers, not even one. The closest thing was that dream sequence I talked about where he talked with one of the gods. But you don't get anything. It just, nothing explains anything in this book. And if it happens, it's happening in the last quarter of the book. And by then it doesn't even matter, because by then you've quit on the protagonist, because there's no reason to follow him. You don't get any motivation to follow him. You don't know why he matters. So you give up on the book. Now, for the people who push through it, finish the book, maybe things came together in the end. Maybe it was worth it. I doubt it was worth it, but maybe it still got good. I don't doubt that there might have been good last quarter of the book. I do doubt that 300 pages in the middle of gimmicks stopping you from understanding anything and having zero connection to any of the characters is ever a good thing. There needs to be a reason for you to read through the book. If I could skip the middle of the book and read the first 100 pages and the last 100 pages and still get the same amount of information, that's a bad thing. So that's why I eventually stopped reading this book, is because I didn't get any sense of progression. And that was the worst part about this book. Aside from the main character living every trope imaginable, I just wanted something to feel like the story was progressing, and it just never did. And that is why I put it down in favor of a new series, just to read something else that would feel like something was happening, that I wasn't wasting my time reading this book, because I have a lot of books that I want to read. So overall, there are good things about this book. There are bad things. There are ugly things that some people like, some people don't. It's up to you if you want to read this book. This is a collection of my opinions mixed with reviews of others. I try to give both the good things and the bad things. A lot of people liked how the author built the world and came up with mystical races and things like that. But in my opinion, it fell short. I would give this book 2 stars out of 5. Maybe worth a read if these things sound like they would still be fun to you. If you're willing to give it a try, go ahead. Maybe the second book got better as well, because the second book did just come out. It's called The Name of All Things, and it will be a 5-book series. I hope that it got better. I hope that she overcame some of these issues and made you care more about the character and gave him more motivations and gave the reader inclinations as to what those motivations were, so we could care too. But personally, for me, I don't plan to finish this book unless one of you finished it and really thinks it's worth reading that last quarter of the book. I don't plan to go and finish the series. I don't plan to read any other books in the series, but I feel like this author has potential. I feel like she's got a lot of good things going for her, and she knows how to do a lot of world building that can be really cool. I just don't think I'm going to give her another chance with this particular series. So when she comes out with a book not related to this series, I'll probably give her another shot. But until then, she'll kind of stay shelved, and I'll be reading other people in the meantime. Anyway, my name is Evan. I like to write. If you like this video, go ahead and subscribe. Ring the bell to know when I put up another video. I usually put up 1 to 3 videos every single week. If you want to hear my opinions on anything else, go ahead and leave a comment down below. If I haven't read the books that you want me to review, I will read them and then get back to a review. Anyway, have a great day, and I will see you on the other side.